Good afternoon. This is Kristina Tanasichuk, Executive Editor of Homeland Security Today, here with Brenda Brockman Smith, who's the Executive Assistant Commissioner for Trade at the Department of Homeland Security. And we're very excited to welcome you. Hello.
Hello.
It's great to see you again.
It's wonderful to be here. Thanks so much for the opportunity. And even in these circumstances, always a good chance to engage with you, Kristina.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate it very much because we know that this has been truly a historic transition. And I have to congratulate you and all of your colleagues at DHS for doing it so seamlessly. I don't think the American people really understand that you took all of DHS operations online overnight, but that's essentially what happened, and you did it without one news story, unfortunately. But congratulations to all of you, because we did not see any tick or problem or challenge at DHS. At least I didn't. So that's, you may have, but we didn't on the outside, and I think that's what's really, really important. So thank you again for being with us. We wanted to do this interview with Ms. Smith because she is in charge of so many things that I think Americans don't think about on a regular basis, and that is the facilitation of our trade laws and also overseeing our trade agreements with so many countries, 20 countries that she oversees, and also directing CBP's 7 priority trade issues. And trade is an issue in counterterrorism and homeland security because of some of the components that are going into our agreements after 9/11 and certainly before that to protect the borders. So you manage an amazing team, and we're very excited. We know that trade is one of the hottest topics in the election with China and everything else. It's been top of mind for many Americans and certainly the president. So we just wanted to touch base on what the scope of your responsibility in trade is for DHS.
Great. So I lead the trade mission for Customs and Border Protection, which really is the primary trade agency for the Department of Homeland Security. And one of our mantras is that economic security is homeland security. When you think about the pandemic response is sort of a perfect opportunity to look at how important trade is. You know, what was the first question that everybody asked was, where can I get PPE? Where can I get, how do we make sure that we can get ventilators in? How can we make sure that we have sufficient food supplies, right? Everybody was worried about toilet paper and Clorox wipes. That really is dependent on predictable, consistent supply chains that are flexible enough that when you can't get supplies from one place, you can shift and get them from somewhere else. You also, there was a lot of discussion about, how do we make sure that supplies aren't leaving the United States when we need them here? And that regulation of supply chains is really a lot of what CBP does in partnership with a lot of the trade policy issues. There's also, as you mentioned, a lot of the bread and butter issues that we deal with, implementation of the trade agreements such as USMCA, which happened on July 1st. So we were in full work from home as we did the last couple of months of implementation activities. We have been very engaged in issues like e-commerce, again, really important during the pandemic response so that people have stuff show up on their doorstep. And then the other thing that we've been really focused on, as you mentioned, is the response to China. A lot of issues coming out of China these days, whether it is related to e-commerce or on the other end of the spectrum related to forced labor. A lot of activity for us there.
So you mentioned an acronym, USMCA. Could you just clarify that acronym for us?
Of course. So USMCA is U.S., Mexico, Canada agreement.
Okay.
And it is the new NAFTA, or the North American Free Trade Agreement.
Excellent. And so one thing you mentioned was the PPE and other things that were being imported. You played a role in counterfeiting as well, correct? And do you work with ICE on that? Or that was the huge issue around the PPE and, the rumors of the masks from China being infused with COVID. So
yeah, so we actually have had numerous seizures of counterfeit PPE. We work pretty closely with the Food and Drug Administration and other agencies around the government that have expertise and interest in the area. But I'm trying to remember what the numbers are. I know it's north of 1 million shipments, sorry, 1 million packages of PPE that we've seized that were counterfeit. The other thing that we are also concerned about are the counterfeit test kits, the COVID test kits that we're seizing. And so really trying, again, to keep the American public safe. And we had to get very quickly start to target for the pandemic response goods that everybody was really looking for. And so there was a huge market in them. And we needed to get smart on those and really go after those to make sure that they didn't get to American consumers.
Absolutely. And I know that throughout the government, although some people claim, the government wasn't ready, you all have had plans for years for this type of activity or other types of things that we don't want entering the country from. I know that you spoke at a Women in Homeland Security luncheon talking about the dangers of a particular bug getting into the cargo. So I know that as a nation, we do have many plans and we were prepared for these types of activities. But how has security and those types of issues impacted our trade agreements over time?
So it's been interesting. So the USMCA is really the new generation of trade agreements. And one of the things that we've learned really since 9/11 is that our relationships with other countries, when they're founded on economic interaction, it makes everybody motivated to be collaborative and also allows us to basically outline our expectations and the other country outline their expectations. And so things like and their economic security issues around things like trusted partnerships. So our CTPAT program is reflected in a number of newer trade agreements. Our expectations around forced labor, an economic security issue, are reflected in the USMCA, along with our expectations, as well as our offer to partner and support efforts for, in this case, in Canada and Mexico.
Excellent. Well, that kind of gets to my question about border security, because you did mention something that plays a very critical role in border security. Could you talk a little bit more about what role you all play in that?
Sure. So border security can mean many things. And, a lot of times we often think about border security as the officers at the ports of entry or the agents that are standing by the wall or out in the desert. But trade really is part of border security, making sure that we have consistent supply chains that we can depend on, that are supplying important goods. So I talked a lot about the PPE and the COVID response. Medications are another part of that. But I also think that being sure that, for example, we're not distracted by food insecurity. And if people are worried about getting enough food to feed their families, that is going to be a huge distraction, and it won't let us focus on the other important issues of the day. And so supply chains that we regulate are a key part, I think, of making sure that we have reliable supplies of goods, and that they are coming in at a reasonable price and they're safe. And I think that's a key part of keeping our homeland safe.
Absolutely. So what are CBP's priority trade issues?
So we have 7 that we have identified and that were enshrined in the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act, which Congress passed in early 2016. And they are issues that we have identified over the course of 20 to 30 years that are issues with impact and issues of interest. but they really are what I would say the highest risk issues. They are things like anti-dumping and countervailing duty, where we're looking to ensure that we identify and address non-competitive trade. We also have highlighted intellectual property rights and import safety, which are, again, critical not only to safety and security, but also the viability of U.S. business as they innovate and then try to sell products based on their innovations. Those innovations need to be protected. And those are really important for us to focus on because we have a lot of tools at our disposal. We're also focused on agriculture. We've already mentioned free trade agreements, revenue collection. CBP is the second largest revenue collecting agency in the federal government this year. In fiscal year 19, we collected over $80 billion worth of revenue on behalf of the federal government. So that's another area that we focus on. So those are the areas, they really are our priorities and the priorities that we have set for our enforcement and facilitation activity.
So what are you seeing as some of the top issues in enforcement? I know that enforcement is a true challenge. Like, we all want our true Louis Vuitton bag. We don't want a counterfeit, but you mentioned counterfeit medications and all kinds of different things that can threaten our citizens. So what are some of the top trade enforcement issues you're seeing?
So I would say that the priority trade issues are our main sort of buckets of priority. So whether it is making sure that goods are not dumped here in the United States so that U.S. business faces an unlevel playing field, or whether we're looking at e-commerce. And as you know, Kristina, e-commerce has exploded in the last 5 to 10 years. And it's really been a challenge for us to make sure that a lot of the new players in e-commerce supply chains understand what their responsibilities are, and that those that are trying to hide in the large volume of small packages that are coming at us, we can find. And so we've spent a lot of time and energy making sure not only that our legal authorities are lined up to be what they need to be for us to be able to take enforcement action, but also that our operational approach has shifted from, every day dealing with containers full of goods to now every day dealing with nearly 2 million small packages where we have both drugs hidden, we have counterfeit goods hidden. And when we take enforcement action, it has to be very streamlined because there's so many packages. We're also looking at things like what is the data that we need around those shipments so that we can use our regular targeting approach, and what analytics do we need to be able to find that needle in a haystack. If it's 2 million packages a day, where in those 2 million do we have the greatest risk? So we've been spending a lot of time building our analytics, as well as making sure we have the data in place to feed those analytics and the operational processes to take advantage of the results.
So many follow-up questions and so little time. No. So I just want to touch on that for just a second. But I do want to get back to you sharing with our audience a little bit more about what global supply chain means and why that's a concern. Because, those words are thrown around a lot, but I don't think people really understand how deep and far a supply chain can go and how one critical widget could muck up the entire system. So if you want to touch base on that, but I do want to ask about artificial intelligence and your data collection, because I know the audience would love to hear about that too. So,
sure. So let's talk about an automobile, right? We think, okay, I only buy U.S. cars, right? You hear that from a lot of people. I want an American car. But when you think about the way that cars are produced these days, one of the big changes in USMCA was around the requirements to increase what is built in North America in order to get a reduced duty rate on those cars, right? Cars are expensive, so you could end up paying a good bit of money if the duty rates are high. But what this administration has decided is that they really wanted to double down on automobile production in the United States with US made steel and aluminum, but as importantly, automobiles that have supply chains that extend through Canada and Mexico. So those cars that you may buy on a dealer lot somewhere here in the Washington area, actually, many of them are produced, the final production may be here in the United States, but some of the intermediate production, let's say the wiring harness or the seats, may be built in Mexico at a factory just over the border and then shipped into the United States for processing. The components, however, may come from a factory in Vietnam or in Malaysia, where some initial work was done. If it's an electronic component or a battery, it may rely on cobalt that was mined in Africa, or gold that is built in very small amounts into some of the components. And so if you think about that, I've just mentioned, Africa, I've mentioned Malaysia, I've mentioned Vietnam, I've mentioned Mexico and Canada, all going into an American-made vehicle. That's a fairly simple supply chain. We have other products that go through many more hands, and every time they go to a different country, they have to go through a customs process. They have to have shipping logistics around them, and they have to be done for low cost in a predictable, transparent fashion. So one of the things that we do is work with our counterparts around the world to have streamlined customs procedures that everybody understands. So if you're doing business in other countries, it is predictable and you understand what the requirements are, so that when we get that American-made vehicle, it doesn't cost us $100,000 or $150,000.
Absolutely. Thank you. And so your use of AI, just following up on your data analytics and building out your capabilities, I know that a lot of folks in our audience work with or are, getting their brain and arms around how AI can assist. And with all of what you're managing, how are you approaching artificial intelligence?
So a couple of years ago, we started doing just proofs of concept. We had one with a university. We did one with a private sector consortium that pulled in technology as well as a couple of different sources of commercial data. We also did some work in-house to see what we could build just with our in-house resources. And we use the learning from those proofs of concept to start moving us towards a full-fledged acquisition program, which we are just about, we hope, to complete our acquisition decision event 2A. For those of you that work with the DHS process a lot, for us, that gives us a pretty significant green light. We are in the midst now of technical demonstration. And we have, the program itself is called the Advanced Trade Analytics Platform, or ATAP. And it covers a range of AI technologies. At the bottom line, what we're really trying to do is to leverage the data that we collect better in order to draw out findings, draw conclusions from the data through trend and pattern analysis, through predictive analysis. We're also trying to marry up commercial sources of data so that some of the information that we don't have, for example, around the financial health and well-being of the entities that we deal with, which is a great indicator of risk for us as we're looking at business behavior and the ability to pay duties, taxes, and fees. We also want to know about the corporate structure of many business entities, which are found in publicly available legal records in countries around the world we don't necessarily have access to. And so finding good commercial sources of data, really important. The other piece that I would call out that we're very interested in is robotic process automation. If you think back to the way that customs was done 40 years ago, very paper-based. And over time, we've become much more digital in nature. But we're still doing things by hand. And some of that is a function of the lack of business process reengineering. Some of it is a function of the technology that we previously had available to us. So what we're looking to do is make sure that our human capital is much more efficient by leveraging things through the automated commercial environment and other tools that allow us, chatbots, for example, that will allow us to really take a lot of the manual labor out of the work we do.
So you mentioned ACE, the automated commercial environment, and that has been a huge achievement of yours and your team there at CBP. Congratulations on that. Tell us just a little bit more about that. Describe it for our audience.
So every shipment that comes into or goes out of the United States has to file data elements, and so that we know what is in that shipment, who it was manufactured by, who it was shipped by, where it was shipped from, what the good itself actually is. So lots of data. That data is collected in what's known as the Automated Commercial Environment, or ACE, which we revamped over the last 20 years, but really about 4 years ago finished the primary core system, which is also known as the single window. And in the automated commercial environment, we are able to take in the data from the trade community, and there are, I think the estimate is something like 1 million different private sector users, whether they're carriers, importers, customs brokers that provide data to us. We then use that within Customs and Border Protection to process transactions, to make our assessment about risk and whether we need to stop and look at a particular container or package. We also use it to collect our duties, taxes, and fees and other regulatory requirements. We also provide data to 47 other government agencies across the U.S. government that have an interest in those shipments, whether it's the Fish and Wildlife Service or the Food and Drug Administration. So we've been able to build this single window on behalf of the entire government, and the data that is collected once, and then is transmitted across the government where we make a decision about the risk. It comes back into ACE, and that risk level is messaged out to the private sector. So ACE is really the backbone of what we do in processing trade. We're always looking to make it better. We've had a lot of improvements in the cloud environment over the last couple of years. And so, as you noted, we haven't missed a beat when we had to go to virtual processing and virtual work.
Yes, excellent. Congratulations again. I know many people don't throw a party for that, but it has been an evolution, and it is certainly worth some kudos to you and your team. So I know we're kind of running out of time with you. I could talk to you all day, I think, because you do manage so much of what's so important for our economy and for our people. But kind of as a final question, what challenges do you think we still face to enable legitimate trade and maintain the highest security standards?
I think e-commerce is really the wave of the future. But I think the disruption that we've seen with e-commerce, all of the small and micro businesses participating, goods coming from all over the world very quickly, is the wave of the future. We're trying to get our arms around that through a project called 21st Century Customs Framework, where we're trying to project the actions that we need to implement now to ensure supply chain stability and prosperity in the next 30 to 40 years. So a lot of great input from the private sector as well as from government operational and policy experts. We have built that into a package that we are putting the finishing touches on, but we think the challenge of modernizing now in a very fast-moving environment is really critical, and we're looking in the next 12 to 24 months really to be able to share a vision around what we think needs to be done and be able to take the statutory, regulatory, and policy steps to implement those changes that will prepare us for the future.
Excellent. Well, you are the woman to do it. So thank you for your support in this interview today. And certainly if you have other challenges or issues that you'd love to talk to our audience about, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you for your support of HS Today, and certainly of Women in Homeland Security too. So we look forward to seeing you at our next CBP Day. And thank you for what you do. You are amazing.
Well, Kristina, I really appreciate that, but it really is the team. We've got a lot of people here working hard every day, but appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. And I wish you and all of your colleagues well. Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.